The nursing home. The explosion. Gus Fring stepping out of that room with half his face gone, calmly adjusting his tie as if he's still in control. That's the image everybody remembers. The ultimate this guy is unstoppable moment, right up until he drops dead. But here's the thing. That scene isn't a twist. It's a payoff. Because the real question isn't how Gus died. The real question is how the most careful, disciplined, and terrifyingly competent man in the entire Breaking Bad universe loses to Walter White and Hector Salamanca. On paper, that matchup makes no sense. Yet Gus never stood a chance. People love to treat Walt's victory as proof that he outsmarted a mastermind. But if you go back and watch the story closely, that's not really what happens. Walt doesn't win because he's flawless. Gus loses because he has a blind spot. He understands greed. He understands fear. He understands power. What he doesn't understand is irrational people. People driven by pride, rage, grief, and desperation. From his first appearance, that weakness is already there. Gus builds his entire empire around control, predictability, and order. It makes him incredibly powerful, but it also leaves him vulnerable to the exact kinds of people this universe keeps throwing at him. Walter White, Jesse Pinkman, Hector Salamanca. Every calm smile, every calculated move, every apparent victory pushes Gus closer to the same outcome. Because once you see the pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. Gus Fring was always going to. The show tells you that from the beginning. You probably just didn't notice. So let's go back to the start and watch the fall begin in slow motion. So here's the trap a lot of us fall into with Gus Fring. You don't just watch him, you mythologize him. The suit, the glasses, the perfect part in his hair, the way he wipes his hands after killing Victor like he's just finished a shift at Los Pollos Hermanos. Pop culture turns that into an archetype, the flawless TV villain. Calm, meticulous, always 10 steps ahead. He's the anti-Walt. Where Walt is insecure and messy, Gus is disciplined in human form. Think about it. Memes, fan edits, Gus would have won debates. He's treated like the gold standard of competence. But here's the thing. The show is quietly using that against you. Just like Hank can't see Walt because he's locked into harmless chemistry teacher, we can't see Gus's doom because we're locked into untouchable Kingpin. We get dazzled by the aesthetic of control. The tidy restaurant, the spotless lab, the calm monologues about a man providing for his family. It all feels so airtight that when he finally walks out of that room with half a face, it plays as this shocking upset. At the time, it feels like chaos finally beating order. The rewatch tells a different story. You start to notice how boxed in Gus already is. From the very first deal with Walt and Mandela, he's making the same kind of choice over and over. He refuses to meet because Jesse is on the surface. That's smart. No junkies, no risk. But buried in that move is his blind spot. He doesn't actually understand people like Jesse. Unpredictable, emotional, self-destructive. They're just variables to eliminate, not human beings to read. That's a clue, and the show keeps repeating it. So the way we're going to break this down is we're going to move in story order through Breaking Bad, first starting with those early chicken bucket meetings with Walt, running all the way to the nursing home bomb. Then we'll loop back with Better Call Saul and plug in the missing pieces, the superlab construction, Nacho, the cartel, Max, all of it. Scene by scene, we'll track each decision that quietly narrows Gus's options until there's basically one path left, the one that ends in that wheelchair explosion. And the lens here isn't just Gus made a mistake here, and here, and here. To be fair, everyone in this universe makes mistakes. Hear me out. What we're looking for are recurring blind spots, the moments where his rational, orderly worldview misreads people like Walt, Jesse, Hector, and Nacho because they don't behave like efficient little chess pieces. Some of these clues are tiny character beats, a look he doesn't understand, a disrespect he shrugs off. Some are big, strategic choices, over-investing in the superlab, underestimating a broken Hector, believing he can permanently manage Walt's ego. Individually, each one seems minor, maybe even defensible, but still, another missed opportunity. Put them together, and Gus's empire stops looking invincible and starts looking brittle. By the end, his death doesn't feel like a twist. It feels like gravity finally doing its job. And once you see that pattern start in Season 2, You can't unsee it in Better Call Saul. So let's watch where the first cracks actually show up. Max's death. This is where Gus's story really starts breaking. We jump back to Hermanos. The pool, Don Eladio, Hector, the cartel guys laughing, drinking. Gus and Max show up in their nice suits with their little presentation about Los Pollos Hermanos, trying to pitch this as a mutually beneficial partnership. On the surface, it's business. But think about it. The camera keeps lingering on Gus and Max like they're more than just colleagues. There's pride, there's affection, there's this shared dream. Then Hector shoots Max in the head. No warning, no negotiation, just a bullet in the skull and his body dumped in the pool. And Gus is forced to kneel there and watch his partner bleed out, while Don Eladio leans in and basically tells him, "You're alive, because I say so." That's the origin point, not just of Gus's hatred, of his entire operating system. From that moment, he's frozen. Emotionally, he never leaves that poolside. The empire he builds after? It looks like a smart vertical integration play. Fried chicken up top, meth distribution underneath, careful distance from the cartel. But here's the thing, it's not really a business. It's a monument. Every chicken restaurant, every secret tunnel, every disciplined employee is a brick in this massive revenge machine aimed squarely at Don Eladio and Hector. You can see the first big clue in how he even thinks about the cartel. A truly rational kingpin would treat them as a necessary evil. Too big to fight head-on, so you manage them, you compromise, you keep the money flowing. Gus does the opposite. He spends a decade building the perfect scenario just to wipe them out in one glorious move. That's not cold logic. That's a guy ruled by one giant buried emotion, pretending to be logic. And once you see that, all his smart decisions start looking suspiciously like trauma responses. Keeping Hector alive in the nursing home? On paper, it's about information and leverage. But he visits him just to gloat, to stare him down, to replay that day at the pool over and over. To be fair, Gus is careful. He never screams, never loses control. But still, another missed opportunity. A real pragmatist would have put a pillow over Hector's face years earlier and moved on. Same thing with the super lab. It's overbuilt, over-engineered, buried under an industrial laundry. Impressive, sure, but it's also Gus trying to control every variable after living through the one day where he controlled nothing. Hear me out. The micromanaging, the way he handpicks chemists, the way he personally oversees Walt and Jesse. Even in Better Call Saul, when he obsesses over every inch of construction, it's all about never being that powerless again. Which raises the real question. What happens when your entire empire is secretly a revenge script, and someone walks in who isn't part of that script at all? Because Walter White doesn't care about Don Eladio. He doesn't care about Max. He brings a different kind of chaos, one Gus never planned for. And the show starts dropping clues about that clash long before the bomb on Hector's wheelchair. Better Call Saul is where you really see the trap already closing around Gus. We're before Walter White, but long after Max's death. At this point, Gus is the polite chicken man. Los Pollos Hermanos is thriving. And under the cartel's nose, he's quietly pouring millions into a secret meth infrastructure. On paper, this is the rise. But if you watch closely, it's already the cage. Look at the timeline. He's got the cartel partnership. He's got his restaurants. He's got his distribution lines. And in the background, he's carving out that hollowed-out industrial space that will become the super lab. Think about it. This is supposed to be the moment where he's most secure, yet he's sneaking around like a guy who knows one wrong move gets him buried in the desert. The micromanagement is the giveaway. This isn't a man delegating. This is a man hovering. He personally interviews and handpicks Werner and the German crew. He personally tours the excavation site in a hard hat, watches the concrete pours, checks the ventilation, obsesses over timelines. When the project falls behind, he doesn't send a middle manager. He shows up himself, in the middle of the night, to stare at a hole in the ground and silently terrify everyone. Then, you stack Nacho and Mike on top of that. Gus doesn't just give Nacho orders, he keeps him on a leash so tight the guy can barely breathe. He has Mike shadowing the Germans, shadowing Nacho, shadowing Salamanca operations. Layers of surveillance, all routed back to one man's brain. But here's the thing, An empire that only functions because one guy is watching every angle is not actually strong. It just looks strong from the outside. The Superlab excavation is the perfect example. The secrecy is insane. Hidden transport, underground bunker, imported German engineers who don't know where they are, fake cover stories, phones locked in boxes, cameras everywhere. It's impressive, sure. It's also massively overinvested in one location and one product line. One leak, one worker who breaks, one accident, and the whole thing turns from master plan into giant crime scene. And you can see the structural weakness every time something goes slightly off script. Werner wants to see his wife. A guy gets homesick. Mike hesitates. Suddenly Gus isn't the calm, untouchable mastermind. He's pacing, making late-night calls, personally deciding who lives and who dies just to keep the project on track. To be fair, he fixes the immediate problem. But still, another missed opportunity to notice that if one homesick engineer can almost topple your dream lab, your system is not as bulletproof as you think. Hear me out. Better Call Saul is quietly telling you that Gus's power is fragile. He looks invincible, but every safeguard makes the machine more rigid, not more flexible. So what happens when something truly unpredictable slips into those gears? Someone who doesn't care about his rules, his schedules, his careful revenge clock? That's where Walter and Jesse come in, and that's when all this tightly wound tension finally snaps. Nacho Varga is what happens when something unpredictable slips into Gus's gears. On paper, he's exactly the kind of guy Gus thinks he understands. Street level, ambitious, scared of the Salamancas, perfect material for leverage. But think about it, from the moment Gus discovers Nacho's secret move against Hector, the show is already telling you that Gus's whole control strategy has a blind spot. The discovery itself is classic Gus. Nacho swaps Hector's pills, Hector collapses, and at the time it looks like a clean, hidden play. Then Gus quietly pieces it together. The missing pills, the timing, Nacho's nervous energy. It's an obvious clue for someone like Gus, and he doesn't miss it. He confronts Nacho in that chilling, calm way and flips the script. Nacho isn't a free agent anymore. He's a hostage. From that point on, Nacho is living a double life, reporting on the Salamancas while pretending to be loyal to them. Here's the thing. Gus reads Nacho perfectly. On the surface. Useful, scared, controllable, an asset who will do anything to protect his father. To be fair, that's not wrong. Nacho does go along. He plants the drugs, he moves product. He walks into one suspicious setup after another because he thinks it's the only way to keep his dad alive. Gus looks at that fear and that love and files it under guaranteed obedience. But Gus never really asks the one question that matters. What's this doing to Nacho over time? He doesn't consider the internal breaking point, the way guilt and pressure and constant lying eat away at someone. To Gus, Nacho is binary. Asset, not threat. Reliable, not unreliable. As long as the leverage is in place, the result is locked in. In Gus's head, fear plus opportunity equals permanent control. Hear me out, because this is where the pattern really shows. Nacho's loyalty isn't to Gus or the cartel. It's to his father and to his own sense of dignity. That's a different operating system than Gus's spreadsheets and schedules. So when everything finally collapses in Better Call Saul, Nacho does something Gus's model does not predict well at all. He chooses a controlled death over endless manipulation. He steps out, confesses, spits in Hector's face with the truth, and forces his own ending. From a cold, tactical view, that's irrational. Why not cling to life at any cost? But still, another missed opportunity for Gus. This is exactly the kind of pride-driven, emotional choice he keeps underrating. The same kind of pride that will later keep Hector staring him down, ringing that bell, refusing to break. And this is your pattern interrupt. You're not supposed to just admire Gus's clever blackmail here. You're supposed to feel how ugly and unstable it is. Gus doesn't build loyalty. He builds pressure cookers. Nacho is the first one that visibly explodes. Walt and Jesse? They're just the bigger, louder versions of the same problem waiting to go off. And once you see that, you're ready for the other piece of Gus's illusion. Because Gus doesn't just run on fear and pressure. He runs on one very specific person quietly holding the whole thing together. Mike Ehrmantraut, the loyal Lieutenant Gus can't replace. Mike is the one guy in Gus's orbit who actually understands messy human behavior. Not in a theoretical, people are unreliable way like Gus. That kid is going to relapse and shoot someone way. He reads Walt. He reads Jesse. He reads Nacho. He doesn't always act fast enough, but the reads themselves? Dead on. Think about it. Early on, when Gus is still impressed by Walt's chemistry and that calm, polite exterior, Mike is already side-eyeing him. The lab camera feed, the disappearances, the ego. Mike clocks that Walt isn't just a cook. He's a problem. Same with Jesse. Gus sees a junkie liability who can be upgraded or discarded. Mike sees a traumatized kid who will either stabilize with the right handling or blow the whole place up. And Gus knows Mike has that skill. That's why he keeps deferring to him. Surveillance, enforcement, damage control, the dead drops, the tailing, the follow this guy for 3 days and tell me if he twitches assignments. Gus is calm. Chessmaster Image is backed by Mike constantly running risk assessment in the background. You almost never see Gus personally watch someone's house. Mike does that. You almost never see Gus personally interrogate the low-level guys. Mike does that too. Here's the thing. That means Gus's empire isn't just centralized around one genius boss. It's secretly a two-woman operating system. Gus for strategy, Mike for reality checks. And that creates another hidden fragility. You don't just have to break Gus. You can break the translator who turns Gus's big plans into something that actually works on the street. You see the cracks in that partnership way earlier than Gus does. Mike is skeptical about Walt from almost the first job. He warns Gus that Jesse is volatile, that dragging him deeper into the operation is a red flag, not a promotion opportunity. He's visibly uncomfortable with Gus's escalating war against the cartel, especially once it stops being about business and becomes about Gus's personal revenge over Max. To be fair, Gus does listen, up to a point. He hears Mike's warnings. He just filters every clue through his own agenda. Walt is a tool to hurt the cartel. Jesse is leverage on Walt. The war is catharsis he's been chasing for decades. So when Mike says, "This is getting messy," Gus basically replies with, "Messy is the point." But here's the thing. Once Walt realizes how much Gus leans on Mike, the whole game shifts. Walt starts targeting that relationship, pitting Mike's pragmatism against Gus's obsession. Every time Gus doubles down on revenge, Mike's trust shrinks a little. And Gus? He doesn't have a backup Mike waiting in the wings when that trust finally runs out. So what happens when the one man who actually understands people starts seeing Gus as the problem? To answer that, you have to go all the way back to the first time Gus ever lays eyes on Walter White. Mandala, the first meeting. Or, technically, the first almost meeting. At the time, Walt and Jesse are desperate. Combo is dead, their street dealers are spooked, and they're sitting on pounds of product they cannot move. Saul steps in with a miracle, a mysterious distributor who can buy it all in one shot. It sounds perfect, until Gus takes one look at Jesse's file and says no. Not because the meth isn't good, because Jesse is high. On the surface, this is peak Gus Fring. He doesn't chase quick profit, he screens for reliability, he refuses to sit down with a junkie who might talk or screw up. That decision instantly sells him to you as the anti-Tuco. Calm, careful, professional. But here's the thing, in that exact move, you're also watching Gus make his first big misread about Walt. Gus decides he can work around the chaos by cutting Jesse out. He thinks the problem is the addict, not the man who chose to partner with the addict. He sees Walt's blue as a product, not as a symptom. To be fair, from Gus's angle, the clues look obvious. Middle-aged chemistry teacher, family man, cancer patient, scared and broke. You dangle money, safety, structure in front of that guy, and he'll fall in line. Right? Except Walt is already telling you he's not that guy. Think about it. He's lying to Skylar daily, building a whole second life. He's already skipped a family event to cook. He's already bragged about his product to Jesse, letting his ego flare every time someone calls it art. This is not a rational contractor, this is someone getting high off being the best. Gus doesn't ask why a terminally ill man is willing to vanish for days. He doesn't dig into the psychology of a guy who will risk missing his daughter's birth for a score. He doesn't clock how proud Walt is that his meth is 99% pure, or how insulted Walt seems at the idea of being underpaid. Those are massive red flags about volatility and pride, but Gus files them under negotiation noise and moves on. He focuses on conditions, not character. If he controls the lab, the schedule, the security, the money, then Walt will behave. Hear me out. Gus is basically treating Walt like another piece of equipment. Expensive, specialized, but still a tool. And that's the seed of the blind spot. From this first encounter, Gus puts Walt in the box labeled talented but controllable, and never really updates that label, even as Walt's behavior keeps screaming the opposite. Another missed opportunity to see the real threat forming right in front of him. Because once you misfile someone like Walt in your mental cabinet, every wild move he makes later, you're going to rationalize it away. And the next time Gus does that, it won't just cost him a deal. It'll start costing him his empire. And Gus doesn't just misfile Walt in his head. He builds an entire system designed to keep that file as far away from him as possible. The security cameras. This is Gus's favorite trick. You see it in Los Pollos Hermanos when Walt first walks in, nervously scouting the place. Gus isn't out front, he's in the back room, silently watching Walt on a bank of monitors, studying his posture, his timing, who he talks to. No words, no eye contact, just video feed. At the time, it looks impressive. He feels like this silent chess master, right? He's got angles on every table, every register, every door. But think about it. What is he actually getting from that footage? He sees Walt sit. He sees Walt hesitate. He sees him almost leave. That's data. Those are patterns. But they're surface level. This fits Gus's whole philosophy. He wants a controlled environment where people move like pieces on a board. Cameras, trackers, scheduled drops, heavily managed routines. It gives him this illusion of omniscience, like if it's in frame, he understands it. And to be fair, against normal people, that works. Most guys in his world are driven by fear, money, or addiction. You can predict that from a distance. But here's the thing. A camera can't show you ego. It can't show you the specific flavor of resentment boiling under Walt's Mr. Chip's exterior. It can't show you the humiliation, the midlife crisis, the desperation to matter that's pushing him into the game in the first place. Those are things you only catch in real, messy conversation, where someone slips, or overreacts, or says the quiet part out loud. When Gus finally does sit down with Walt, he still doesn't abandon that distance, he just upgrades it. Now Walt is a variable in an equation. Gus offers him money, safety, structure, a pristine lab under the laundromat. To Gus, those are the levers. You want stability? Done. You want respect? I'll call you partner. On paper, it's perfect. Who walks away from that? But Walt isn't operating on paper. He's operating on pride. And that's the blind spot. Gus never actually interrogates Walt's psychology. He doesn't ask, why did this high school teacher jump into the cartel world in the first place? What kind of person does that? He just files Walt under talented asset who will respond to incentives and moves on. Hear me out. That same distance that keeps Gus alive in the short term is exactly what keeps him blind in the long term. He misses how irrational pride behaves when it's cornered. He misses that some people would rather blow up the board than play by his rules. And once you realize that, every later move he makes with Walt, with Jesse, with Hector, it stops looking like genius and starts looking like a guy watching the wrong screen. Because the next test of this philosophy won't happen in a restaurant. It'll happen in a lab, with a gun to someone's head where no camera can save him. And that lab with the gun to someone's head? It only exists because of a much older decision. A decision Gus makes long before Walter White ever walks into his restaurant. The cartel deal. This is where Gus quietly chooses revenge over survival. On the surface, the arrangement looks smart. Gus bows to Don Eladio, pays his tribute, plays the loyal distributor. He runs Los Pollos Hermanos, acts like a harmless chicken man, and in the background he's building his own infrastructure. Trucks, fronts, a regional network. And at the center of it all, the Superlet, the perfect hidden engine for a future where he doesn't need the cartel at all. At the time, it looks like patience, discipline, the classic long game that everyone praises him for. But here's the thing. That long game is not actually about business. It's about Max. Think about it. Max's execution by the pool isn't just a tragic backstory beat. It's the moment Gus gets frozen in place psychologically. From that day, every polite smile to Don Eladio is a mask. Every tribute payment is a down payment on revenge. He's not just expanding distribution. He's building the weapon that will eventually replace the cartel. So when we get to that pool scene in Salud, and Don Eladio brings him back into the fold? On paper, that's the dream offer. Genuine reconciliation, or at least a very convincing imitation of it. Eladio laughs with him, hugs him, calls him partner, offers profit sharing, shared power, stability. A purely rational operator could look at that and go, low risk, high reward, I win. But Gus isn't that guy anymore, if he ever was. To be fair, you can't watch your closest friend die in your arms and then just become a spreadsheet. For Gus, accepting peace would mean admitting that Max died for nothing, and that the cartel still gets to define the rules. So he smiles, he drinks, he pretends to accept, and he poisons the entire leadership instead. In that moment, he doesn't just kill Don Eladio. He kills the last possible version of his life, where compromise is still on the table. Once that pool turns red, there is no peaceful equilibrium left. No going back to just business. Now he's locked into an unwinnable war on two fronts. The surviving Salamancas, especially Hector, are never going to. At the same time, his growing empire and that shiny superlab are throwing off bigger and bigger clues for the DIA. More trucks, more product, more moving parts that can go wrong. And by the time Walt shows up, Gus is already in a position where he can't back down, can't de-escalate, and absolutely cannot tolerate wildcards, which is kind of a problem, because the next wildcard he invites into his lab doesn't just cook, he explodes. So the real question is, what happens when Gus's need for total control slams into a man who only feels alive when everything is out of control? The Superlab. On first watch, it feels like Gus's final form. You see that pristine underground cathedral of stainless steel and glass, and it's obvious the show wants you to be impressed. The reveal is almost religious. The slow walk down, the hum of the ventilation, Walt stepping into this spotless, hidden facility like a pilgrim entering a temple. And Gus? He moves through that space with this quiet reverence, like every pipe and beaker is proof that he beat the cartel at their own game. Think about it. This isn't just a lab to him. It's the monument to his entire worldview order. Precision. Control. On paper, the business logic is flawless. Centralize production. Maintain absolute quality control. Keep everything buried under an industrial laundry where nobody will ever look. From a distance, it's smart, efficient, elegant. But here's the thing. Every perfect system hides a cost. Gus pours insane amounts of capital, time, and, more importantly, personal attention into this one underground. It's not just an asset. It's a single, glowing point of failure. Once the Superlab is up and running, Gus ties his entire meth operation to one location and one cook. Walt isn't just another employee, he becomes the irreplaceable component. You can feel it every time Gale talks about Walt's genius. Red flag. The more unique Walt's product is, the less Gus can pivot. If something goes wrong with the lab, or with Walt, Gus can't just shrug and move production. He has no redundancy, he has perfection, and nothing else. Better Call Saul makes this even more evident. You watch Gus obsess over every inch of construction, the German engineers, the concrete pours, the way he personally inspects tiny details that, to be fair, most bosses would never even notice. This isn't just micromanaging, it's emotional investment. Hear me out. By the time the lab is finished, Gus isn't just running a business. He's building his legacy for Max, for his revenge, for his own myth. Walking away from that later isn't a strategic choice. It's a psychological impossibility. And that's where Walt becomes the biggest clue that this fortress is actually made of glass. Gus knows Walt is volatile. He's seen the ego, the pride, the way Walt bristles at being handled. But still, another missed opportunity. Instead of creating backup cooks, backup labs, backup plans, he doubles down on the one man most likely to blow everything up, literally. Pattern interrupt for you. Stop admiring the lab as Gus's ultimate power move and look at it the way Walt eventually does. A beautiful, efficient, insanely fragile box. One pipe bomb. One vengeful old man in a wheelchair. One emotional miscalculation. And the entire empire that Gus anchored to this underground masterpiece can vanish in a single, silent explosion. So if Gus's superlab isn't really a fortress, what does that say about the kind of war he's actually fighting, and how someone like Walt can exploit every crack? If the superlab is a glass box, Walt is the rock someone's already thrown at it. Because by the time Gus brings him underground, Walt's ego has been rattling around this world for a while, and the show has been quietly screaming, "Do not treat this man like a normal employee. Go back to the beginning. The blue meth. The purity." Walt doesn't just want a product that sells, he wants 99.1% stamped on his soul. When Jesse suggests cutting it or changing it, Walt reacts like Jesse just insulted his entire life. That's not a business decision. That's identity. Think about it, he's in his underwear in the desert, dying of cancer, cooking meth in an RV, and he still needs to be the best. Then the money fight. When Tuco underpays him, Walt doesn't walk away. He doesn't negotiate. He puts on a ski mask, walks into a maniac's lair, and throws fulminated mercury at the floor. Who does that when they're supposedly just trying to provide for their family? Someone whose pride has already outrun their survival instinct. Crazy 8 is the same clue in a quieter key. Walt makes a list of pros and cons about killing him, tries to be rational, tries to be the guy Gus later assumes he is. But the second he realizes Crazy 8 has been lying about the broken plate, Walter doesn't just see a threat. He sees an insult. He strangles him, crying, but still choosing ego-preserving violence over the fantasy that they could coexist. Here's the thing. Gus sees the chemistry, not the psychology. When he hears about the blue, he sees a scalable product. When he meets Walt at Los Pollos for the first time, he hears a man bargaining for money, safety, and Jesse's inclusion. To be fair, from Gus's vantage point, those sound like normal sticking points. Higher pay, better conditions, protect my partner. All stuff you can buy off, but Walt's not haggling. He's demanding recognition. He insists Jesse cooks with him, not because it's efficient, but because it proves Walt has leverage and loyalty. When he pushes for 3 months' worth of money in Mandala, it's dressed up as "I need to provide before I die." But underneath, it's the same pattern. Pay me like I'm irreplaceable. As the partnership goes on, the red flags only get louder. Walt misses cook sessions. He argues about Jesse's treatment. He questions Gus's decisions in that super lab that's supposed to inspire obedience. Any normal boss sees this as turbulence, maybe a midlife crisis. Gus files it under temporary management problem. Not this man will blow up my entire life if he feels disrespected. But still, another missed opportunity. Because hear me out. Once Walt realizes Gus is grooming Gale to replace him, the game flips. It stops being about money, cancer, or even family. It becomes a pride war, a contest over who gets to define who's the man in this empire. And Gus, who has spent decades training himself to ignore his own ego for the sake of the long game, has no idea how to fight someone who would rather burn the board than lose. And the moment Walt sees that replaceable label on his back, that's when the controlled, silent war Gus thinks he's winning turns into something much louder and much harder to predict. And that louder war? It needs one more ingredient. Because for all of Gus's planning, his end doesn't just come from Walt's ego. It comes from the one person Gus keeps trying to treat like a fixable problem instead of what he really is. Jesse Pinkman, walking emotional chaos. Think about it. When Gus truly starts investing in Jesse, Jesse is absolutely wrecked. He's fresh off Combo's death, Jane's overdose, the trauma of killing Gale. He's using constantly, throwing endless parties just to drown out the guilt. And under all of that, he's clinging to Walt as the only person who's ever called him a partner instead of a screw-up. That's not a stable employee. That's a live wire. Gus's strategy looks smart on paper. Separate Jesse from Walt. Give him responsibility. Treat him with respect in a way Walt never consistently does. He sends Mike to babysit, stages those ride-alongs, lets Jesse play hero in the cartel shootout, and then rewards him with praise and a bigger role. The plan is obvious. Build Jesse up as a reliable solo cook so the operation can survive without Walt's drama. On a spreadsheet, that's great management. Structure, routine, validation, money. To be fair, for most people in Gus's world, that works. You give them a steady paycheck and clear rules, they fall in line. But here's the thing. Jesse isn't making decisions from a rational place. He's making them from shame, grief, and this twisted loyalty to Walt that's half love, half resentment. Look at the clues Gus keeps brushing past. The party house spiral, where Jesse basically turns his home into a 24/7 wake? That's not just a drug problem. That's someone trying to erase himself. The way Jesse kills Gale, then can't even process what he's done, shaking and sobbing in the car? That's not a guy you can just plug into a neat corporate hierarchy and expect long-term compliance. Even later, when Jesse is outwardly functioning, the volatility is still evident. He melts down over the kid getting shot during the train heist. He fixates on the rice and cigarette. Every time something touches his buried guilt, he doesn't just wobble, he flips the table. And Gus keeps treating each outburst as a discrete issue to be managed instead of a giant red flag that this kid will eventually blow up someone's system. Hear me out. Jesse is the first major crack in Gus's whole model. He can't be fully controlled by fear, like the cartel, and he can't be fully bought off with reward, like the contractors in the super lab. His loyalty is rooted in messy, irrational love and guilt, exactly the stuff Gus is worst at reading. Gus thinks he's grooming his replacement asset. What he's actually doing is hardening the one emotional variable Walt can still reach and weaponize. And once that weapon turns, you start to see just how brittle Gus's perfect empire really is. And Gus thinks he's solved it with one move. If Jesse is a volatile weapon Walt can reach, then the answer is simple. Build a cleaner, quieter version of Walt and cut the emotional mess out of the equation. Enter Gale. The backup plan. The student. Gale in the superlab is Gus's dream come to life. He's punctual. He's scientifically competent. He's quoting Walt Whitman while calibrating equipment. No ego, no attitude, no disappearing for cancer treatments while millions of dollars worth of product sits idle. Think about it. From Gus's perspective, this is the obvious fix. You keep the genius recipe, but you swap out the unstable chef. Here's the thing about Gus's logic. On paper, it's flawless. Redundancy is smart. You don't let a billion-dollar operation hinge on one high school teacher with a midlife crisis. You have a second cook ready. If Walter becomes too difficult, if he refuses orders or tries to play cartel politics, you just rotate him out. Quietly, the machine keeps running, the drama disappears. But here's the thing Gus misses. The second he walks Gale into that lab and presents him as Walt's assistant, he's not just training a replacement. He's showing Walt the replacement. In person. In his space. Gus doesn't hide the plan behind the scenes. He lets Walt watch it happen. You can see the moment it clicks for Walt. The careful questions about Gale's background, the way he clocks Gale's competence, his discipline, his total lack of baggage. This isn't some flunky. This is a mirror image of what Gus thinks a perfect Heisenberg should be, just without the actual Heisenberg. And for Walt, that's a giant blinking red flag. This is a man already obsessed with legacy and recognition, who just got a taste of being the best at something. Now he's staring at a literal copy of himself being groomed to erase him from the store. To be fair, if you tell a guy like Walt you're just a temporary asset, I'll plug in a new you later, you shouldn't be surprised when he doesn't take it well. Hear me out. Gus thinks he's tightening control, but he's actually accelerating the conflict. By making the contingency so visible, he confirms Walt's worst fear that once Gale is up to speed, the only loose end left to tie off is Walter White. And we know what Walt does when he feels cornered. He doesn't negotiate. He escalates. So when Walt sends Jesse to kill Gale, it's not some random shocking twist. It's the logical endpoint of Gus's own plan. The backup cook, the neat redundancy, becomes the trigger for the messiest, most desperate act of violence so far. And after that gunshot in Gale's doorway, Gus's illusion of total control doesn't just crack. It shatters. From this point on, every move Gus makes is a response, not a command. And the next response he chooses is what really seals his fate. And Gus's next move? It tells you everything. The lab. The face-off. Walt and Jesse are standing there like two kids dragged to the principal's office, and Gus walks in with that dead-eyed calm. No yelling, no theatrics, just that silent surgical stare as Victor demonstrates he can cook. Think about it. This is supposed to be Gus's victory lap. Gale was the backup, the redundancy, the safety net. Instead, he has a corpse in an apartment and two panicked cooks who just proved they're willing to kill his people. Here's the thing about Gus's reaction. On the surface, it looks like peak control. He says nothing, puts on the hazmat suit, and executes Victor in front of them. But underneath, that's not a long-term strategy. That's a clampdown. He strips Walt and Jesse of any illusion of autonomy, posts guards on them, locks down their movements. It's not discipline, it's fear disguised as procedure. Because the power dynamic just flipped. Before Gale's murder, Gus could walk away from Walt any time. He had a timetable, train Gale, phase Walt out, keep the blue without the drama. After that gunshot, that whole plan is gone. Now he has to keep Walt alive longer than he wants to, not because he values him, but because he literally has no one else who can do the job at that level. So the master planner is suddenly on a clock he didn't set. From this point on, Gus is patching holes. Walt's panicking and trying to pull strings through Saul. Jesse is drowning in guilt, spiraling into self-destruction. Hank is sniffing around Gale's lab notes, getting closer to the superlab by accident. Instead of calmly expanding his empire, Gus is running triage. Every day is about containing fallout from that one chaotic move. Watch how personal he suddenly gets. He doesn't just send a guy to babysit Jesse. He goes to Jesse's recovery meeting himself, sits in the circle, and tries to manipulate him emotionally. He doesn't just let Mike handle the street-level dispute about the dealers using kids. He steps in, sets rules, personally assures Jesse it's handled. He even walks into the hospital and stares down the cartel after the cousins attack Hank. To be fair, it looks incredibly cool. But still, another missed opportunity to notice what's really happening to his system. Pattern interrupt for you. We tend to read all of this as Gus rising to the challenge, like some crime lord upgrade. Hear me out though. It's actually the opposite. A truly resilient system could absorb a shock like Gale's death with procedures, with bench players, with distance. Gus has none of that. His solution to every new crisis is, Gus, more visits, more personal oversight, more trips right up to the blast radius. And that's the subtle clue the show keeps dropping. The closer Gus has to get to maintain order, the less invincible he actually is. He's not a ghost in the machine anymore, he's a guy in a room, juggling volatile egos and open investigations. Which sets up the next stage perfectly. Once Walt realizes Gus is stuck playing defense, he stops trying to survive inside the system and starts trying to break it. The hospital standoff. This is where Gus finally steps out of the shadows. And the show quietly tells you his ego is now driving the car. We're at the hospital after the cousins' attack on Hank. Dia everywhere. Metal detectors, badges, armed agents posted at every door. This is the last place any sane cartel-adjacent person should be. And then Gus Fring just walks in, calm, polite, carrying fried chicken like it's a church potluck. On the surface, it looks like the ultimate power move. He strolls through the lion's den, shakes hands with Hank's family, and then coolly negotiates with the cartel in the parking lot. No flinch, no panic. He basically tells them, in public, that the deal is changing and they're going to accept it. People watch that scene and go, yeah, this guy? Untouchable. But here's the thing. Think about it from a risk perspective. Gus is voluntarily placing himself in a Dia-locked environment during an active investigation into cartel violence. He's not being summoned. He's not cornered. He chooses to put his real name, his real face, his physical movements directly onto federal radar. For what? To send a message. At the time, it plays like genius strategy. He comforts the family, he looks like a community hero, he feeds the cops. To be fair, it works short term. But if you pull back, it's an obvious red flag about where his head is at. The man who built an empire on invisibility is now addicted to theatrical displays of control. This isn't just business. This is therapy with guns. Gus isn't only solving a logistics problem with the cartel, he's reenacting the pool. Hear me out. In Hermanos, he was the guy standing by that blue water, begging Don Eladio, humiliated while Max is murdered in front of him. Powerless, forced to watch. In the hospital, he flips the script. Now he's the one who walks into enemy territory, dictates terms, and walks out untouched. Same emotional stage, different props. Once you see that pattern, the scene stops being a clean flex and starts looking like a tell. Gus needs to be seen. He needs the cartel to fear him. He needs his own people to whisper about how he walked into a Dia fortress and didn't even break a sweat. And, maybe most dangerously, he needs to prove to himself that he's not that desperate man at the pool anymore. But still, another missed opportunity for him to stay truly safe. A rational Gus sends intermediaries, uses phones, keeps layers. This Gus is willing to gamble his entire cover on a dramatic gesture. And that need to look untouchable? That's the same impulse that will later keep him driving back to Hector Salamanca's bedside, again and again, when the simplest move is obvious: stop showing up and walk away. And where does he keep going back to? Hector, the one place that is obviously not safe, not smart, Not necessary, but emotionally irresistible. Hector Salamanca in Breaking Bad's present is a joke at first glance. He's in a wheelchair. He can't speak. He communicates with a single little bell. To the staff, he's just another cranky old man in a nursing home, a relic from some cartel days nobody there even believes were real. And you're meant to feel that. You're meant to think, this guy, this is the legendary Salamanca. But here's the thing, Gus thinks that too. The ritual humiliation. This is where Gus's mask slips in a way that's really obvious once you look for it. He doesn't just tolerate Hector being alive. He schedules him. He visits him regularly, stands over him in that bland little room, and taunts him. Gus brings him news of the cartel's decline, of the Salamanca's losing territory, of Don Eladio's fate. He leans in and calmly describes how Hector's entire bloodline is being erased, while Hector can't even form a word. Think about it. Every one of those visits is risk. He's exposing his face, his routine, his ego to the most vindictive man he's ever met. For what? Not business. Not logistics. Pure satisfaction. And he twists the knife. Gus makes sure Hector understands that his nephews died screaming. He positions himself as the new king of the territory Hector once ruled through terror. He even forces Hector to watch his rise in person, having him wheeled out to the Los Polos office to see the DIA take down the cartel truck, or parading his control through Tyrus and the nurses. It's not enough to win. Gus needs Hector to know he lost. To be fair, at the time it looks efficient. A living reminder of what happens if you cross Gustavo Fring. A trophy. But here's the thing, trophies don't hate you back. Hector does. This is where the misread becomes fatal. Gus sees a defeated old man, broken body, trapped in a chair, surrounded by nurses and handrails, safely contained. He thinks the only thing left is to watch the light go out of Hector's eyes, day by day. What he misses is that Hector's pride is untouched. That's the one part of him that never got paralyzed. And if you know their shared history, that's a massive red flag. Hector is the one who put Max face down in that pool. Hector is the one who laughed while Gus screamed. He was the embodiment of cartel cruelty, the guy who taught Gus that power is personal. Gus doesn't keep Hector alive out of mercy. He keeps him alive to savor a slow, theatrical revenge, stretching that moment by the pool across years. But still, another missed opportunity. Because by preserving Hector, Gus is preserving the one person in the world who hates him enough to do what no rational rival would ever do. He's not just keeping an old lion in a cage, he's feeding it. And when that lion finally finds a way to bite, it's going to take Gus down with it. The only question is, who hands Hector the teeth? Who hands Hector the teeth? Gus thinks he's grooming a soldier. He's actually sharpening a knife. The Jesse Gambit. This is Gus trying to out-Walt Walter White without ever raising his voice. After Gale's death, watch how fast the playbook changes. No more dismissive the attic talk. Suddenly, Jesse is getting invited to dinner, sitting across from Gus at that eerily quiet table, while Gus praises his instincts about the dealers using kids. That's not small talk. That's a recruitment speech. Think about it. At the time, Gus's logic is brutally clean. If Walt is the problem, you don't just kill him, you kill his leverage. You make Jesse feel valued, competent, autonomous. You turn the screw so that the kid who used to call Mr. White for permission now gets his orders straight from the boss. A loyal Jesse means a dispensable Walt. And on paper, it's smart. Gus gives Jesse more responsibility in the operation, starting with those ride-alongs with Mike. Collections, pickups, security. Jesse's in the car, chattering, trying to impress this stone-faced fixer, and Gus is watching from a distance. Every time Jesse doesn't screw up, every time he handles a tense situation, it looks like evidence. Clue after clue that the reprogramming is working. But here's the thing, Gus is misreading the data. He sees Jesse showing up on time, following orders, keeping his mouth shut. To be fair, from Gus's worldview, that's what loyalty looks like. The structure, the routine, the quiet competence. It's all very Los Pollos. You, as a viewer, see something completely different. Jesse isn't becoming loyal. He's becoming numb. Those drives with the desert standoffs, the dead-eyed calm when he spots the guy in the truck about to pull a gun, that's not a success story. That's a walking trauma response. Jesse is drowning in guilt over Gale, over the kid on the bike, over every life he's wrecked with Walt. and he's clinging to Gus's structure because it's the only thing that makes the noise stop for a few hours. Hear me out. Gus is trying to fix a psychological wound with a promotion. He thinks if he praises Jesse, feeds him, calls him smart, the kid will transfer that desperate need for approval from Walt to him. It's the most obvious red flag in the world that he doesn't understand who Jesse actually is. Pattern interrupt. This isn't mentorship. It's an HR solution to a soul problem. Gus is basically saying, "You're broken. But good news, I made you assistant manager." But still, another missed opportunity. Because Jesse's attachment to Walt isn't just about respect. It's tangled up with guilt, with needing Mr. White to be redeemable so Jesse himself might be redeemable. Gus never accounts for that. He reads competence as commitment, when it's really just survival. So when Walt finally weaponizes that guilt again, when he reframes Gus as the true monster, Jesse flips. And in that moment, all of Gus's careful investment evaporates, exposing the weakness he never saw coming. You can't outschedule someone's trauma. And Walt is about to weaponize that chaos one last time. The Brock poisoning. This is the moment where Walt stops being just unpredictable and starts aiming his chaos like a sniper rifle. At the time, it almost feels too far, even for this show. But think about it, this is the exact move Gus can't even see on the board. The setup is simple. The execution is terrifying. Brock gets sick. Jesse immediately jumps to the rice and cigarette. He tears his place apart, realizes it's missing, and his brain does exactly what Walt needs it to do. Connect Gus, the kid, and the threat. Walt barely has to push. He just nudges Jesse toward the obvious villain in the story they've been building for weeks. Here's the thing. Gus has been trying to manage Jesse with structure, with routines, with the lab, with that careful I see potential in you mentorship. Walt doesn't manage Jesse. He detonates him. He takes Jesse's love for this kid and his trauma over children in danger, and he turns it into a weapon with one move. Gus did this. Strategically, it's brutal. Morally, it's horrifying. But still, another missed opportunity from Gus's side. Gus knows Jesse is volatile. He knows Walt is desperate. He's already seen Walt blow up Tuco, run over dealers, pull a gun on Mike. The red flags are everywhere. And yet he never imagines Walt would risk a child's life as a psychological lever. Why? Because Gus's model of the world just doesn't include that option. To be fair, his whole empire is built on a code. No drugs at the chicken restaurants. No chaos in public. Revenge on the cartel, yes, but done with discipline and distance. Even his worst acts, like what he does to Victor or what happened to Max, are framed as controlled responses to disobedience or insult. So when Brock gets sick, Gus reads it like a normal threat environment. He thinks about surveillance, about routes, about whether Jesse will keep cooking. Walt is playing a different game entirely. Walt is inside Jesse's head, not his schedule. Hear me out. This is the exact point where Walt surpasses Gus strategically, not because he's smarter in some abstract way, but because he's willing to make moves Gus can't even predict. Walt embraces irrational, taboo-breaking plays. He'll fake a breakdown, crash a car, poison a child, whatever it takes. Gus is trying to play perfect chess. Walt is fine with lighting the board on fire if it gets him checkmate. And you can see how blind Gus is to this kind of threat. He's watching cameras, he's tracking cars, he's micromanaging the lab. But he's not tracking the one variable that's actually deciding the war. What Jesse will believe when he's cornered and terrified. From this point on, Gus isn't just up against a rival cook. He's playing chess against someone who's willing to flip the board, break the pieces, and set the table on fire if that's what it takes to win. And the next move Walt makes with that mindset? That's the one that finally blows a hole straight through Gus's perfect system. The parking garage. This is Gus's big I know something you don't moment. On the surface, it looks like proof that he's untouchable. But think about it. This scene is actually the show quietly telling you he's already boxed in by his own mindset. Gus walks toward his car. Calm, precise. The echo of his footsteps is doing half the suspense work for you. Then he stops. No obvious clue, no gunshot, nothing you or I can see. He just freezes, turns his head, and starts scanning the rooftops. That slow 360, the way the sound drops out a bit, you can almost feel his brain running through danger scenarios in real time. And to be fair, this is Gus at his best. His situational awareness is insane. He doesn't know what's wrong, but his body knows before his mind does. He abandons the visit to Hector, leaves the garage, and you can tell he's not second-guessing himself for a second. He trusts his gut more than the plan. Here's the thing, though. What he senses is the trap, not the pattern. He correctly reads immediate danger, but he never fully steps back to ask the bigger question. Who is actually moving the pieces to make this happen, and what does that say about how far they're willing to go? The obvious answer in his head is cartel business or loose-end cleanup. You can see it in how he carries himself afterward. He's irritated, not rattled. To him, this is an operational problem. Someone's trying to hit him. Fine. He tightens security. He reshuffles visits. He keeps Hector at arm's length. It all stays inside the same mental folder. Cartel remnants. Dia heat. Maybe Walt poking around where he shouldn't. Suspicious, yes, but still familiar. But here's the thing. By this point, Walt is already outside that folder. Walt has sat with Hector, listened to that bell, and realized this man hates Gus more than he loves his own life. That's a terrifying data point. That's not just a red flag, that's a nuclear sign flashing in your face. And Gus, of all people, misses it. Hear me out. Gus knows Hector's history. He knows this is a guy who once ordered massacres like coffee refills. Yet when he looks at Hector now, he sees a broken relic, not a viable weapon. He cannot imagine an enemy who would weaponize suicidal hatred, because his own system is built on control, discipline, and long-term survival. Using Hector as a living bomb just doesn't fit the model, so the parking garage showdown becomes another missed opportunity. Gus avoids the bomb this time, but only by reading the air, not the story. He smells that something is off, but he doesn't update his idea of who he's really fighting or what they're willing to sacrifice. And that tiny gap, that refusal to redraw the map of his enemy, that's exactly what Walt is about to drive a wheelchair right through. And that tiny gap, that refusal to redraw the map of his enemy, that's exactly what Walt is about to drive a wheelchair right through. Which brings up the big question people always ask. If Gus is this ruthless, this efficient, why doesn't he just kill Walter White the second he becomes a problem? On paper, it seems obvious. You've got a dangerous, unstable liability. You do what Gus did to Victor. But here's the thing. By the time Walt is openly challenging him, Gus is way more boxed in than it looks. Start with the practical trap. Gale is dead. That's Gus's backup brain, gone in one night because Walt forced Jesse's hand. The superlab is built, the cartel is pressuring him for consistent blue product, and the only person on Earth who can hit that exact standard is the angry chemistry teacher who just declared war on him. Think about it. If Gus kills Walt immediately, he doesn't just lose a cook. He loses the entire business model he spent years and millions constructing under that laundromat. Just use Jesse, right? Except Gus has already seen Jesse high, late, and emotionally all over the place. This is the guy who almost got combo killed with his own stupidity, who spirals every time something touches his guilt. You really want to stake your cartel negotiations on that? To be fair, Gus does start grooming Jesse as a potential replacement, but at the time Jesse is a long-term project, not a plug-and-play solution. And the cartel situation matters. Gus is in the middle of a slow-motion coup. He's poisoning Don Eladio, he's flipping the power balance, and all of that depends on steady output of the blue. Any disruption, any sudden dip in quality or quantity is a giant red flag to people who already don't trust him. Killing Walt too early risks signaling weakness or chaos at exactly the wrong moment. Then you layer in the psychology. Gus doesn't just want Walt gone. He wants to win correctly, calmly, surgically, no splash. A messy hit on a suburban dad with a Dia brother-in-law? That's not just risky. That's sloppy, and Gus hates sloppy more than he hates Walt. A bullet in Walt's head could land right on Hank's desk. And remember, Hank is already circling Gus. The GPS tracker, the Los Pollos visits, the Superlab suspicions. Any suspicious accident involving Walter White suddenly becomes a clue Hank cannot ignore. Gus knows this. That's why he tries to isolate Walt, break him, replace him, not just erase him. Here's the pattern interrupt. What if Gus not killing Walt isn't a plot hole at all, but the most evident consequence of his own perfection? He's built an empire so optimized, so tightly engineered around one product and one process, that it's actually fragile. There is no low-risk way to remove the key component without shattering the machine. So every day Gus lets Walt live, it looks like hesitation. But really, it's another missed opportunity baked into the design. His system is so rigid, it can't bend around a wild card like Heisenberg, it can only snap. And in the next part, you'll see exactly how Walt learns to apply pressure to that one brittle point until the whole thing explodes. So when the pressure finally hits, it doesn't come from one direction. It comes from everywhere at once. Think about it. By mid-season 4, Gus is basically fighting a three-front war while trying to babysit the very bomb that's going to blow him up. You've got the cartel. You've got the DIA. You've got Walt and Jesse, all colliding. On one side, the cartel escalates. They send the cousins after Hank. They squeeze Gus's territory. They demand a bigger cut and a return to the old ways. This isn't just a business dispute. For Gus, it's a trauma loop from Max's death reopening. On another side, the DIA is suddenly obsessed with the blue stuff. Hank, who was ready to quit, now has a brand new purpose in life. Find whoever is cooking this 99% pure meth. At the same time, inside the lab, Walt and Jesse are imploding, missing cooks, picking fights, and dragging their emotional chaos directly into Gus's pristine system. And how does Gus respond? He tightens his grip. Hard, more surveillance. More cameras on Walt and Jesse. More direct oversight from Mike and Tyrus. He stops being the invisible owner who occasionally checks in and becomes a hand-sung war general. He personally walks into cartel territory to poison Don Eladio's entire crew. He orders hits on street-level dealers. He micromanages Jesse's loyalty with those hospital visits and that "I'm proud of you" routine. On paper, it's brilliant. To be fair, tactically, Gus wins almost every round. But here's the thing. Every one of those wins costs him something he can't easily replace. The Eladio poisoning wipes out the cartel leadership, sure, but it also forces Gus to expose himself, physically and operationally. He's vomiting in a cartel bathroom with his shirt off while Jesse guards the door. That is not the untouchable ghost we met at Los Pollos. It's a man burning through his margin for error. His enforcement structure makes this even worse. Gus doesn't have an army, he has a tiny special ops squad. Mike, Tyrus, a handful of trusted hitters. That works when the job is quiet intimidation and surgical strikes. Under sustained war, every bullet really matters. Mike gets shot during the cartel showdown and suddenly Gus loses his field general. One injury and half the system seizes up. No deep bench. No redundancy. One bad day away from collapse. And while all this is happening, Walt is learning. He sees Mike stretched thin. He sees Gus personally escorting him through the desert, personally visiting Hector, personally managing Jesse. That level of involvement is a clue in itself. It tells Walt that if he can just knock out one or two of these pillars, the whole thing wobbles. So by the time you reach the endgame of Season 4, Gus isn't the calm mastermind from Season 2. He's sleep-deprived, overextended, and juggling too many plates. And hear me out, Walt isn't just adding another plate. He's quietly sawing through the table legs underneath, and Gus is too busy fighting his war to notice the most obvious red flag of all. That the real threat was never the cartel or the DIA. It was the man he kept alive in his own base. Gus thinks the real danger is chained to a boiler. But while he's staring at Walt, someone else is quietly staring at him. And that someone is Hank. Hank versus Gus is the investigation that almost happened. The one that, if it fully ignites, ends this whole empire way before Walt ever gets to ring a bell. Think about it. Hank actually gets closer to Gus than he ever gets to Walt until the very end. First, the distribution puzzle. Hank starts with the blue meth on the street, then works backward. He sees the pattern, consistent purity, tight territory control, no obvious chaos. That already screams a disciplined network, not some random junkie cook. When Gale's notes and the lab setup point to a professional operation, Hank starts circling industrial-scale infrastructure. Tank farms. Storage, transportation, and what quietly fits all of that? The industrial laundry and a fried chicken chain with trucks everywhere. Los Pollos Hermanos becomes the first big red flag. The chicken joint is always near the blue. Gus's trucks are always in the right places. Hank even says it out loud. This guy is suspicious. But here's the thing about Gus's defense. He doesn't run from scrutiny. He buries it under his public persona. Charity events, hospital donations, scholarship programs. Gus is in every photo that screams pillar of the community. At the time, that image doesn't just make him look good, it actively makes it harder for Hank to sell the idea that this soft-spoken, polite restaurant owner is secretly a drug kingpin. To be fair, if you're a DIA agent, the guy handing out free chicken to cops doesn't exactly scream cartel boss. But Hank keeps pushing. He gets suspicious of the industrial laundry, he tracks the trucks, he digs into the company records. Then he does the bold thing. He plants a GPS tracker on Gus's Volvo in the hospital parking lot. That tiny device is the moment the two worlds collide. Walt's boss versus Walt's brother-in-law, and Gus is suddenly in the middle. Gus finds the tracker almost immediately, and instead of panicking, instead of disappearing, instead of pivoting to some backup identity he almost certainly has, he walks straight into the DIA office, lays the tracker on the table, and politely confronts Hank. It's performative innocence. A live-action alibi. Hear me out. This is Gus's pride talking. His need for control won't let him vanish into the shadows when his image is threatened. He has to manage the narrative. He has to outcharm the investigation. He gambles that Hank will look at this confident, composed businessman and think, no way he's my guy. And it works. For that round. But still, another missed opportunity cuts both ways. Hank misses the clue that Gus is overcompensating. Gus misses the clue that stepping into the light gives fate another clean shot at him. Every time he does it, more people learn his name, his face, his patterns, and the next person who lines up their sights on Gus Fring, they won't be wearing a DIA badge. And the next person who lines up their sights on Gus Fring, they won't be wearing a DIA badge. It's a retired cartel killer in a wheelchair, in a nursing home, with a grudge older than Gus's entire empire. The nursing home visit. This is Gus walking straight into his own blind spot. At this point in the story, he thinks the board is basically cleared. Walt is handled after the failed car bomb in the parking garage. Jesse is back under his thumb. The cartel? Outmaneuvered and buried. So when Hector suddenly starts making noise with the DIA, Gus doesn't see a threat. He sees housekeeping. Think about it. From Gus's perspective, Hector is the last messy, emotional loose end from the old days. The man who mocked him, humiliated him, watched Max die. Gus has already dismantled the Salamanca operation piece by piece. Tuco, gone, the cousins, gone, the cartel leadership, wiped out. Hector is the final trophy. So Gus decides this one is personal. He doesn't just send Tyrus. He doesn't let Mike handle it. He wants to be in the room, standing over Hector, narrating the terms of his defeat. He believes he's walking into a victory lap. That visit to Casa Tranquila? In his mind, it's not a risk. It's the encore. Here's the thing about what Gus plans to do there. He's not just going to taunt Hector. He's going to flip him. Force Hector to cooperate with the DIA, to give up his own people, turning this living symbol of cartel pride into a tool of Gus's design. That's the fantasy. The man who once refused to even speak English around Gus will now sign his name on Gus's paperwork. But still, another missed opportunity. Gus completely misreads what kind of man Hector is. He assumes everyone, given enough pressure, will act like Gus, long game, pragmatic, willing to swallow pride for survival and control. Hector is the opposite. Hector is a creature of short-fuse pride. This is the guy who rang a bell to insult people before it was his only way to talk. The idea that he'd betray the cartel's code, for Gus of all people, is almost laughable. To be fair, at the time, Hector does look harmless. Silent, drooling, stuck in a chair. Gus reads all of that as weakness, as proof that Hector has nothing left. But here's the thing. Having nothing left is exactly what makes someone dangerous. If you track Gus across both shows, he always trusts people less when they're emotional, but he also stops taking them seriously once they seem broken. That's the combo that kills him. So he insists on minimal backup. Just Tyrus to sweep the room. No Mike. No real paranoia. Gus is so confident in his read that he walks straight toward the one variable he's never truly accounted for. Irrational, self-destructive revenge that doesn't care about survival. Hear me out. In that tiny room at Casa Tranquila, every pattern we've talked about is about to collide. Gus's obsession with revenge, his need for control, his contempt for anything that doesn't make rational sense, all focused on one old man, one bell, and one bomb he never even considers possible. In that room, all of Gus's supposed strengths line up in a perfect firing squad and aim at him. Watch how it plays out beat by beat. Because the clues that he's about to lose are right in front of him, and he still walks straight into it. He enters, calm, composed. This is a victory lap, not a risk. He brings Tyrus, his human security blanket, and immediately sends him to sweep the room. Think about it. Gus is cautious enough to have the place checked for guns, wires, extra bodies, but not for motives. Not for the one thing you can't detect with a bug sweep, someone willing to die. When Tyrus gives the all clear, Gus walks in with that icy confidence, hands in pockets. Perfect posture. He stands over Hector like he's already won, because in his mind he has. At the time, this is the culmination of decades of obsession. The cartel is gone. The last Salamanca is broken. This isn't a confrontation. It's a performance. Here's the thing about the bell. To you, watching, it's suddenly very loud. You notice every ring. To Gus, it's background noise. For years, that bell has meant nothing but helpless rage. Every time Hector rang it, he was powerless. No one came. No one listened. Gus trained himself to hear it as an annoyance, not a signal. His contempt literally deafens him. So when Hector suddenly starts slamming that bell, Gus reads it exactly the way he always has. Fear. Impotent anger. Another missed opportunity to see what's obvious. He even leans in, like he's savoring it. He assumes the old man is finally breaking, finally giving him the emotional payoff he's been waiting for since Max died. But here's the thing. That agitation is communication. It's Morse code. Hector's eyes aren't just wild. They're locked on Gus. He's not begging. He's warning. Gus has spent years studying this man's hatred, but he has never once considered that Hector could turn that hatred into something strategic. And this is where Gus's psychology kills him. A man who has spent years savoring slow revenge cannot fathom instant mutual destruction. It's not just that he doesn't like that option, it doesn't exist in his emotional vocabulary. He can imagine Hector suffering for years. He can imagine Hector begging. But Hector choosing to die just to take him out? That doesn't fit the Gus Fring model of rational behavior, so he doesn't even model it as a threat. Then the bell hits that frantic rhythm. The camera pushes in. Gus finally feels that something is wrong, but it's too late. He moves, but he doesn't understand. The explosion hits. Cut to silence, and when Gus steps out of that room, straightens his tie, and then reveals the damage, it's not just a cool shot. It's the show rubbing it in. His control was always an illusion. The real question is, who actually shattered it first, Hector? Or Walt? So after that tie-straightening shot burns into your brain, it's really tempting to walk away thinking, wow, Gus Fring almost pulled it off. Walt just got lucky. But hear me out. Once you zoom out, it starts to look like Gus was always going to lose. Because look at the pattern we've already seen. Gus isn't a flawless mastermind. He's a guy whose entire strategy is warped by one emotional obsession, revenge for Max. That trauma locks him into a single mission: destroy the cartel, humiliate Hector, and everything else bends around that. The super lab? Over-centralized. His whole empire is basically hanging from one underground room in Albuquerque. His crew? He's weirdly dependent on a handful of lieutenants. Mike, Tyrus, a few trusted drivers, and then, disastrously, Walt and Jesse. One crack in that chain, and the whole thing shakes. And then there's his biggest blind spot. Gus cannot process irrational actors, unstable addicts, prideful egomaniacs, bitter old men in wheelchairs. He keeps trying to run them like they're spreadsheets. Think about it. In Mandala, he refuses to meet Walt because Jesse is high. On paper, that looks smart. High partner? Red flag. But here's the thing. He never actually learns how volatile Jesse is emotionally. He just files him under unreliable and moves on, which is exactly how Walt later sneaks Jesse out from under him. But the show doesn't present him like this at first. It invites you into the myth. You see the calm demeanor, the tidy routines, the immaculate restaurant persona. The way he wipes down tables, changes into that pristine suit, quietly cuts checks for the dia. On a first watch, it's so obvious what they want you to feel. This guy is untouchable. He's composed, polite. always 10 steps ahead. Even the way the camera lingers on his rituals sells the idea that order equals invincibility. On rewatch, that same aesthetic flips. Those routines don't feel like strength. They feel like compulsion. The lab isn't a fortress, it's a single point of failure. His politeness with Hank isn't confidence. It's a man betting his life that no one in that office will ever think of him as suspicious. To be fair, it works for a while, but still, another missed opportunity on his part to notice how brittle his setup really is. The clearest example is those visits to Hector. At the time, they play like pure dominance. Gus walks in, straight-backed, leans in close, whispers about killing the cartel, about wiping out Hector's bloodline. On a rewatch, the vibe is completely different. It's not a king taunting a fallen enemy. It's a man compulsively poking the one bear that can still maul him. Every visit is another clue that his revenge loop is stronger than his survival instinct. So instead of asking, how did Walt manage to beat Gus? Flip it. Ask, how did Gus's system make it so easy for someone like Walt to break him once they found the right pressure points? Because once you see how centralized, emotionally driven, and blind to chaos his empire really is, Walt doesn't look like the miracle underdog. He looks like the exact kind of problem Gus was never built to handle. And the show keeps nudging you toward that idea, especially when you look at how he behaves long before Walt ever cooks a single batch. And the show keeps nudging you toward that idea, especially when you look at how he behaves long before Walt ever cooks a single batch. Because underneath all the intimidation and precision, the Gus-Walt matchup is really order versus chaos. And once you see that, the ending stops feeling like a twist and starts feeling like math. Gus is order, routine, systems, 5-year plans. He's the guy who will wait decades to pay back the cartel for killing Max. He builds a super lab that's basically a monument to delayed gratification. Everything is scheduled, documented, controlled. Walt is the opposite. Walt is chaos. He's improvisation, ego, and short-term, high-risk gambits. He's the guy who walks into Tuco's office with fulminated mercury and bets his life on a bluff. In a normal world, Gus wins that matchup 10 times out of 10. Think about it. In a stable environment, order is king. The person who can build sustainable power, lock in supply chains, and keep emotions out of it will always crush the guy who keeps flipping the table. And for a while, that's exactly what we see. Gus has the trucks, the lab, the lawyers, the shell companies. Walt has an RV and a very fragile marriage. But Breaking Bad is not a stable environment. It's a pressure cooker. The cops are closing in. The cartel is restless. Cancer is ticking in the background. The show keeps cranking the heat so high that the usual advantages of order start to look like handcuffs. Gus's code, all those rules he lives by, become limits. Walt's lack of a code becomes a weapon. Here's the thing. Under extreme pressure, the person willing to break rules faster, take taboo risks, and sacrifice more usually outmaneuvers the one who still believes in any line they won't cross. Gus won't use children as pawns. Walt will poison Brock. To be fair, Gus using kids as dealers is already awful, but he still has a boundary. He won't directly target a child to manipulate Jesse. Walt looks at that same red flag and sees an opportunity. Gus won't blow up his own operation. He's poured millions into that lab. It's the crown jewel of his empire. Walt will light a match without blinking. When he torches the lab with Jesse, that's not just a plot point. It's a clue about how the game is rigged. Walt is willing to destroy the very thing they're all supposedly fighting over. And mutual suicide? That idea doesn't even exist in Gus's playbook. He walks into Casa Tranquila because he assumes everyone is still playing by basic self-preservation. Hector and Walt are not. They're ready to die as long as Gus goes with them. It's suicidal chess, and Gus is still playing regular chess. So hear me out. Once you frame the story as order versus chaos in a world designed to reward whoever goes lower, Gus's loss stops being a surprise and starts to feel like the only possible outcome. And the show doesn't just do this with Gus. It keeps testing this rule with every other professional who thinks they're above the chaos. And that professional label is exactly where Gus falls into his own trap. The psychology trap. Gus doesn't just run his world like an adult in a room full of children. He needs to see it that way. It's his armor. Think about it. Every interaction we see is built around him being the calm, reasonable authority figure surrounded by people he quietly treats as impulsive kids. Watch him with the cartel. The pool meeting with Don Eladio? Everyone's laughing, drinking, posturing. Gus is stone still, hands folded, voice low. He speaks in measured, almost corporate language while these guys joke about murdering his partner. On the surface, it's composure. Underneath, it's a self-image. I'm above this. I'm the adult here. Same thing with Walt. That first meeting in the restaurant, Gus leans in, soft-spoken, almost paternal. I hide in plain sight, just like you. He's not just offering partnership, he's defining the relationship. Gus is the successful mentor who's already mastered the game. Walt is the talented but emotional rookie who needs guidance. To be fair, at the time, that feels accurate. Walt is panicking about money and cancer. Gus is running a chicken empire and a meth empire without breaking a sweat. But here's the thing. Once Gus buys into that hierarchy emotionally, he can't really imagine Walt as a true equal, let alone a threat. In his head, he's the rational one. Everyone else is ruled by ego, fear, or rage. That's the obvious red flag in his psychology that the show keeps flashing at you. Look at his body language. He rarely raises his voice. He tilts his head, makes eye contact, speaks slowly. With his employees, he's almost gentle. The way he comforts the fry cook after the Los Pollos truck is hit, or the way he addresses the staff after Gail's death. It's not just leadership. It's paternal. He's the calm dad holding it together while the children freak out. And when people get emotional, he talks down to them. Jesse at dinner is the clearest example. Gus invites him into this pristine, controlled home, cooks him a perfect meal, and then basically gives him a life lecture. You can hear the subtext. You're reckless. You're an addict. But under my guidance, you can be useful. He reads Jesse's emotions as weakness, not as potential volatility. But still, another missed opportunity. The same emotional kid he underestimates becomes the lever Walt uses to blow everything up. Hector is even worse. In the nursing home, Gus stands over him like a disappointed parent visiting a sulking child. He mocks Hector's bell, his wheelchair, his silence. He cannot accept that this broken old man is still dangerous, because danger, to Gus, is supposed to look controlled, efficient, adult. Pattern interrupt for you. What if Gus's composure isn't pure strength? What if it's arrogance in a really nice suit? Once you see his "I'm the only adult here" mindset, his blind spot for emotional people stops being a coincidence and starts looking like a countdown clock. And that clock is ticking loudest in one specific relationship we haven't fully broken down yet. So let's go back in time for a second. Because if you watch Better Call Saul in order, Gus's downfall stops feeling like a twist and starts feeling like a checklist the universe is slowly working through. First, the superlab. The construction. The obsession. You watch Gus walk that underground cavern with Werner and his crew, and it's almost funny how personally offended he is by concrete. Every imperfection is a crisis. Every delay is a betrayal. Think about it, this is supposed to be a scalable industrial empire. But Gus has to physically stand there, night after night, to make sure a German engineer pours cement correctly. On the surface, that looks like discipline. High standards. But here's the thing, it's also a giant red flag about how brittle his system actually is. The second Werner starts to crack under the isolation, Gus's machine stops looking efficient and starts looking extremely manual. He's flying to the desert. He's micromanaging Mike. He's personally authorizing an execution because one unpredictable, emotional variable walked into his orbit and the whole thing creaked. Then you've got Lalo, the walking opposite of everything Gus believes in. Gus plays Lalo like he's dealing with a standard cartel thug. Trackable, bribable, containable, cameras in the chicken farm, tight alibis, fake construction sites. On paper, it's airtight. But Lalo is chaos with a smile. He jumps borders, stages a home invasion, fakes his own death, and then casually walks into the Superlab site like he's doing a bit. To be fair, Gus is cautious. He hides a gun in the lab, builds secret escape routes, layers lie on top of lie. But he still underestimates Lalo's improvisation, the same way he'll later underestimate Walt's. He assumes that if the plan is elegant enough, the wild cards will eventually behave. Instead, they keep forcing him into these sweaty, last-second knife fights, literal and metaphorical. Now layer Nacho on top of that. Nacho is the most obvious clue that leverage is not the same thing as control. Gus has his father's life in his hands. He's got the Salamancas squeezing from the other side. On paper, Nacho should be predictable, terrified, compliant, useful. But hear me out, the more pressure Gus applies, the less readable Nacho becomes. He's not playing for money or power, he's playing for a way out. You can see the strain. Every time Nacho has to improvise, Gus's operation lurches. Emergency meetings, sudden hits, Mike begging for a cleaner solution because the current one is held together with fear and duct tape. And Gus? He keeps stepping in personally, because his system cannot naturally absorb a man who is driven by love for his father and hatred for the Salamancas at the same time. That's the pattern. Whenever an emotionally motivated wildcard shows up, Werner, Nacho, Lalo, Gus's perfect empire needs Gus himself as a constant patch. It's efficient until it isn't. It's controlled until one person refuses to act like a spreadsheet. Seen in order, Better Call Saul isn't just backstory. It's a slow-motion demo reel of why Gus was never built to survive the kind of messy, ego-fueled story Breaking Bad is about to throw at him. And the scariest part? Walt is just Lalo and Nacho and Werner rolled into one, turned up to 11. So that raises the obvious what if. If Gus is walking into a story that's wired against him, was there any move he could have made to actually win? Could he have killed Walt earlier, walked away from Hector, or just swallowed his pride and taken the cartel's deal? On paper, yeah, each of those looks like a clean exit ramp. In practice, every solution is just another missed opportunity disguised as a choice. Start with the big fantasy. Kill Walt early. Poison him, stage an accident, pull a Victor, and make him disappear. Simple, right? But think about it. At the time Gus is most tempted, Walt is already tied to Hank, the Dia, and a very public cancer story. A sudden death, or even just Walt vanishing, drags attention straight through Skylar, straight through his job, and straight into Gus's distribution network. And that's before you even factor in Jesse. Jesse is the wild card Gus never fully understands. You murder Mr. White, you don't just lose the cook. You trigger Jesse's guilt, rage, and need for someone to blame. This is a guy who drives around with a gun looking for random dealers after Jane dies. You think he's going to shrug off Gus killing Walt? Best case, Jesse runs to Hank. Worst case, he goes scorched earth in exactly the kind of chaotic way Gus's system is not built to absorb. Okay, so what if Gus lets Hector live? No nursing home visits, no taunts, no final face-to-face. To be fair, that sounds safer than walking into a room with a Salamanca and a bell. But here's the thing. Sparing Hector means leaving the one man who saw him powerless, who mocked him in the desert, alive and breathing. Hector is a permanent red flag in Gus's world, a loose end with a family full of guys who treat revenge like a religion. Gus could move on physically, but psychologically, he's still standing in that pool in Mexico, watching Max die. Which brings us to the cartel deal. Don Eladio offers him what looks like survival. Keep cooking, keep shipping. Just accept your place. No more war, no more risk. On the surface, that's the logical play. But accepting that deal means living every day under the same men who laughed while Max's body bled into the tiles. It means turning his entire life's mission into a quiet surrender. For Gus, that's not survival. That's spiritual death. And this is where character and plot fuse. The writers don't just give Gus a revenge backstory and then randomly kill him with a bomb. They build a man whose strengths, patience, discipline, long-term planning are welded to a wound that won't let him choose anything that looks like mercy, or unfinished business, or submission. So the more you try to map out a version where Gus walks away clean, the more one thing becomes evident. The Gus who makes those smart choices isn't Gus at all. Which raises a darker question the show quietly asks next. If he can't change, who actually does? If Gus can't really change, then the next question is, what happens when the world around him does? That's where Lalo and Walt come in, because both of them are basically walking stress tests for Gus's entire operating system. Start with Lalo. Lalo Salamanca is chaos with a smile. He's charismatic, theatrical, and he treats danger like improv night. One minute he's charming the clerk at Travel Wire, the next he's shooting the guy in the face and vaulting over the counter like it's nothing. He sings while he stalks people. He jokes when he's seconds away from dying. His whole style is to keep everyone else off balance, because even he doesn't fully know what he's going to do until the moment hits. Now compare that to Walt. Early on, He's cautious, timid, always pretending he's just a scared chemistry teacher who got in too deep. But think about it. Every time he survives, he gets bolder, poisoning Crazy 8, running over the dealers with his car, letting Jane die, then later poisoning Brock. By the time he's fully Heisenberg, he's willing to commit atrocities if they solve an immediate problem or scratch his ego. The red flag isn't just that he's dangerous, it's that he keeps rewriting his own limits. Here's the thing. Both Lalo and Walt operate completely outside Gus's preferred parameters. Gus believes in invisible lines. You don't kill DIA agents. You don't draw heat you don't need. You don't improvise when a plan will do. He assumes everyone at least sees those lines, even if they sometimes cross them. Lalo and Walt? They don't even acknowledge the lines exist. That makes them almost impossible for him to box in. Look at how much effort it takes just to temporarily get Lalo out of the picture. Gus needs Mike, a fake arrest, a whole legal strategy, cartel politics, and then an assassination squad in Mexico. And Lalo still crawls out of the compound, smiles, and walks back into the story. To be fair, Gus eventually wins that duel in the super lab, but still, another missed opportunity is evident earlier. He keeps treating Lalo like a problem to be contained, not a force that will rewrite the rules on contact. Hear me out. That whole Lalo operation is basically a preview of his struggle with Walt. With Walt, Gus also brings in Mike, surveillance, Jesse as leverage, careful step-by-step pressure. And just like with Lalo, the tighter he squeezes, the more the wild card mutates. Walt escalates to poisoning Brock and weaponizing Hector. Lalo escalates to sneaking through the tunnel and filming Gus's lab. Pattern interrupt time, you're used to seeing Gus as the apex predator. But Gus isn't the lion of this ecosystem. He's a specialist predator. In his niche orderly, predictable, rational criminals, he's devastating. Once the ecosystem changes and the real chaos agents show up, his strengths quietly turn into blind spots. And the show is about to prove it by putting him in a room with the one person he never fully reads. Jesse Pinkman. Jesse is the test. Put Gus in a room with Jesse, and you see the exact blind spot that's going to kill him. Because how Gus reads Jesse is the same wrong lens he uses on Walter. Here's the thing. Gus thinks Walt is simple at his core. A scared, dying man who wants two things: money and safety for his family. Gus genuinely believes that if you give Walt enough zeros on a paycheck, a state-of-the-art lab, and protection from the cartel, you've solved him. Any ego on top of that? Just noise to be managed. On paper, it looks reasonable. Walt keeps saying it out loud. I'm doing this for my family. He uses the cancer as a built-in excuse, a ready-made sob story that someone like Gus, who lost everything in the cartel world, can relate to. To be fair, if you only listen to Walt's words, that motive sounds obvious. But think about it. Does Walt ever act like a man who just wants a safe, anonymous retirement? Or does he act like someone auditioning for the role of legendary outlaw? Walt's real core is recognition and control. He would rather die as Heisenberg, fully seen and feared, than live as a well-paid ghost in Gus's basement. You see it in the blue. The color is such a small detail that a pure businessman like Gus treats it as branding at best, a cute quirk. But Walt's insistence on the blue meth being his signature is a giant red flag. It's not just chemistry, it's authorship. It's him signing the work. Every time Gus sidelines him, Walt loses it. When Gale starts shadowing him in the lab, Walt doesn't react like a grateful employee getting help. He reacts like a threatened artist being replaced. That panic isn't about losing income, it's about losing ownership. And Gus, who assumes everyone ultimately behaves like a rational contractor, completely misses how suspicious that intensity is. You get the full confession in Felina. Walt tells Skylar, I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. That's the psychological truth that was always driving him, even back when Gus thought he was just a desperate teacher. Hear me out. That one line retroactively exposes every deal Gus ever offered as fundamentally miscalibrated. More money? Better working conditions? Total protection from the cartel? Gus keeps upgrading the benefits package, but he's negotiating with the mask Walt wears: the family man, the victim of circumstance. The man underneath wants something Gus doesn't even put on the table: power, credit, his name whispered in fear. And because Gus never understands that, every solution he deploys is just another missed opportunity to actually control Walt. He thinks he's tightening the leash. Walt thinks he's leveling up his legend. Once you see that Gus is bargaining with a persona instead of the person, his downfall stops looking like one bad misread of Jesse or one risky move with Hector, and starts to feel like something much darker, a tragedy that was baked in from the moment he shook Walter White's hand. The next moves he makes? They only accelerate it. And if Walt is the persona Gus bargains with, Jesse is the one variable he keeps trying to turn into a spreadsheet. That's the real problem. Because Jesse isn't driven by profit or power the way Gus assumes. Jesse's core drive is way messier. He wants to feel like a good person, or at least like he isn't beyond saving. Think about it. From the pilot, Jesse's whole thing is this tug of war between what he does and who he wishes he was. He's a screw-up, sure, but he's also the guy who won't let kids get hurt, who panics when things go too far. Every time he gets dragged deeper into violence, the guilt doesn't fade. It compounds. Gus looks at that and sees inefficiency, a bug to be patched. When he first rejects Walt's deal because Jesse is high, it's not because he's clocked Jesse as a moral risk, it's because he sees him as unreliable labor. Later, when he brings Jesse into the fold, he treats Jesse's trauma like a performance issue. Structure, routine, purpose. Put him on the line, give him responsibility, and the noise in his head will quiet down. That's the plan. But here's the thing. Jesse's guilt is not a glitch. It's an alarm system. After he kills Gale, you watch that alarm go nuclear. The breakdown in the lab, the numb, vacant partying, the way he keeps trying to drown out his own thoughts with noise and chaos. On the surface, it looks like weakness Gus can manage with more discipline. Underneath, it's Jesse's conscience screaming that the entire operation is rotten. The street dealers. This is the clearest red flag Gus just blows past. Jesse refuses to kill them at first because a kid got used as a pawn. That's his line. When he finally storms out to shoot them, it's not about business. It's moral outrage. Gus responds by solving the immediate conflict, no more using kids. Everyone calmed down, but he never really updates his read on Jesse. To be fair, the move works in the short term. But still, another missed opportunity to see what Jesse actually is. A guy who will put his life on the line when something feels fundamentally wrong. By the time Jesse cooperates with Hank, that through line is obvious. He doesn't flip for money. He doesn't flip for witness protection clout. He flips because he cannot live with what Gus represents anymore, this cold, calculated machine that turns human suffering into clean, efficient product. Hear me out. The moment Jesse sits in that interrogation room, you're watching Gus's blind spot walk into a police station. Gus never truly accounts for the possibility that Jesse might help bring him down out of sheer moral exhaustion, that someone this broken could still choose conscience over fear. Jesse is the emotional mirror Gus refuses to look into, and once that mirror starts reflecting his empire back at him, you start to see every hidden crack long before the bomb ever rolls into that nursing home. And here's where you have to step back from the story and look at the game board. Because Gus isn't just a character who loses, he's a piece the writers build specifically to be knocked over by someone like Walt. Think about it. Gus doesn't show up in Season 1 as some random mid-tier dealer. He's introduced late, carefully, as the mid-series boss, the guy who has to feel absolutely unbeatable, so that when Walt finally takes him down, it feels like a genuine level up, not a cheap shortcut. You're supposed to look at Los Pollos, the super lab, the cartel negotiations, and go, yeah, Walt is dead. No way he wins this. But here's the thing. If Gus is too perfect, the story dies. If he's actually invincible, Walt's victory either feels like pure plot armor, or it never happens. So the writers walk this tightrope. They give Gus insane competence and presence on the surface, while quietly seeding flaws underneath from the moment he appears. The reliability obsession. This is the first big red flag the show plants. In Mandala, Gus refuses to meet Walt because Jesse is high. On paper, that looks smart. No junkies. No chaos. But it's also a clue. Gus values controlled variables so much that he doesn't really understand unpredictable people. He filters out emotional volatility as noise, not data. At the time, it just plays as discipline. Later, it's evident that this blind spot is exactly what Jesse, Walt, and Hector will exploit. Hear me out. Look at how they set up his revenge fixation. In Hermanos, we see Max die, and suddenly every calm, rational choice Gus has made gets reframed. This guy isn't just a businessman. He's been psychologically stuck in that pool for decades. The cartel backstory locks him into a long-game vendetta, which means the writers now have a lever. Any move that promises him revenge, he will over-prioritize. To be fair, it makes him terrifying. But still, another missed opportunity for Gus to walk away that the story will never let him take. And Walt? Walt is built as the perfect counterpiece. He is worse than Gus in almost every obvious way. Less disciplined, less connected, less experienced. But his rise has to feel earned, so the writers make his one advantage the exact axis Gus can't see: weaponized emotion. Pride, desperation, family, ego. The stuff Gus dismisses as weakness becomes Walt's nuclear option. Pattern interrupt for you. Instead of asking, did the writers cheat to let Walt win? Flip it. Ask, how did they rig the board so his win feels shocking and still completely fair? Once you track Gus's overconfidence with Hector, his emotional blind spot with Jesse, his misread of Walt as managed, you realize the bomb isn't random luck. It's the final logical consequence of who Gus has always been. And the writers aren't done. Because if Gus is the mid-series boss built to fall, the next question is, what kind of monster do you create when Walt survives him? So when Walt survives Gus, the show isn't just swapping one villain for a bigger one. It's quietly flipping the genre on you. Think about it. Gus stops being the unbeatable final boss and starts looking way more like a tragic lead whose story was always headed to that nursing home. Because Gus is genuinely impressive. That's the first thing you have to admit before you can really feel the tragedy. The discipline. The way he won't touch hard drugs. The calm, almost boring professionalism. He donates to the DIA. He sponsors community events. He remembers every employee's name. It's not fake in the cartoon sense. He actually does invest in the community he's using as cover. And under all of that is the one thing that isn't an act at all: his loyalty to Max's memory. The pool flashback. This is the emotional origin story. Gus on his knees, begging Don Eladio for Max's life. Blood in the water. Hector forcing him to look. At the time, it just plays as raw humiliation and setup for revenge. But here's the thing. That moment doesn't just give him a mission. It locks his entire personality in place. Tragedy in storytelling often works like this. A character's greatest strengths double as their fatal flaws. For Gus, it's control, patience, and focus. The same qualities that let him play a decade-long revenge game against the cartel are the ones that keep him from adapting once the world stops following his rules. He builds this perfect, airtight system where every variable is accounted for. No hard drugs, no sloppy partners, no unnecessary risks. Sounds smart, right? But still, another missed opportunity, because he never builds a system that can handle chaos. Walt is chaos. Jesse is chaos. Hector is chaos. And Gus keeps treating all three like they're just pieces on his board. In Mandala, he refuses to meet Walt because Jesse is high. On paper, that's reasonable. To be fair, you don't want a junkie in your multi-million-dollar operation. But it's a red flag about how he thinks. If a variable isn't reliable, he doesn't learn it. He excludes it. He never really studies emotional volatility, he just tries to fence it out. Which is why the nursing home scene hits different when you see him as tragic. The man who once knelt in front of Don Eladio will not kneel again. Not emotionally. Not strategically. He walks into Hector's room fully upright, fully certain, because he literally cannot imagine that humbling himself, backing off, or changing course might save his life. That bomb is the bill coming due for a wound he never healed, not just a villain finally getting what he deserves. And once you frame Gus this way, his story stops being how the big bad lost, and becomes how a man who refused to change met a world that wouldn't stop changing. So the real question is, what happens when that world belongs to Walter White? So if the world now belongs to Walter White, that means every earlier scene with Gus is suddenly doing double duty. It's not just look how powerful he is, it's look how early the cracks are already showing. On a rewatch, you're not watching a mastermind rise. You're watching a man quietly walk toward the one opponent his system can't handle. Start with Los Pollos. That first meeting with Walt. Gus moves like a ghost in that restaurant, sizing Walt up from a distance, pretending to be just the manager. At the time, it feels like pure dominance. He's cautious, calculating, impossible to read. But think about it. Now you know that what he's really doing is projecting safety onto someone he doesn't actually understand. His calm? It's a mask for the fact that he has no category for a guy like Walt, whose ego is a bomb waiting to go off. Then the security camera test. Walt and Jesse walk into the laundry, and Gus is upstairs, silently watching on the monitors. No words, just that slow, controlled stare. It plays as omniscience on first viewing. On rewatch, it's a red flag. He's testing his system, not himself. The cameras, the guards, the lab, all of it is about reinforcing the illusion that if he can see everything, he can control everything. But here's the thing, he never once asks if he actually understands the people inside those frames. Mandala, the refusal to deal with Jesse because he's high. On paper, that's smart business. To be fair, you don't want your $1 million product in the hands of a guy nodding off in the lab. But still, another missed opportunity. Gus treats Jesse like a defective part, not a volatile human being. On rewatch, you can see the future problem baked in. He can punish or exclude chaos, but he can't adapt to it. Now fold in Better Call Saul. Any episode with the superlab construction suddenly feels like a horror story about overconfidence. Gus obsessing over measurements, the secret entrance, the perfect airflow. It's ritual. Every brick is him trying to build a world where nothing unpredictable can touch him. Nacho's blackmail? That's Gus's blind spot in action again. He controls Nacho through fear, but never really sees the desperation right in front of him. And Lalo's cat and mouse games with Gus and Mike are basically a dress rehearsal for Walt, a chaotic, theatrical opponent who refuses to play by Gus's script. Go back to mid-series Breaking Bad. Gus's hospital visit to see Hector, the taunting monologues, the smug patience. Those dinners with Jesse, where he plays father figure and pretends he's not just weaponizing Jesse's trauma. The quiet conversations with Mike about Walt, where Mike says, "This guy's trouble," and Gus insists he can manage it. On rewatch, every one of those scenes flips. His routines become rituals of control. His patience becomes a refusal to confront his own limits. His poise starts to look fragile. And once you start watching for that fragility, you'll notice something else. Tiny, almost throwaway moments where Gus is already losing long before the bell ever rings. The question is, can you spot the first one? And that's where this gets bigger than Gus. Because what you're really watching isn't just one man losing a chess match to Walter White. You're watching a pattern that shows up any time power convinces itself that order equals safety. Think about it. Gus builds an empire where every truck is on schedule, every employee is trained, every contingency is mapped. On the surface, that looks invincible. The lab is hidden. The routes are secret, the chain of command is tight. But here's the thing, tightly controlled doesn't automatically mean resilient. It just means everything works beautifully, until it doesn't. Gus's system has almost no slack, no redundancy. One cook, one super lab, one distribution pipeline built around his personal standards of professionalism. The moment Walt becomes a problem, the whole thing starts wobbling, because the structure isn't designed to bend. It's designed to force people into line. You see this every time he deals with irrational behavior. Jesse shows up high in Mandala. Gus refuses to even meet Walt. Hector is trapped in a wheelchair, furious and humiliated. Gus treats him like a prop he can wheel in and out for revenge. To be fair, on paper those calls look efficient. Why waste time on the junkie and the old man? But still, another missed opportunity. Those are exactly the wild cards that end up blowing him up. Real resilience looks different. It means assuming that people will lie, panic, fall in love, hold grudges, do stupid things out of pride or fear. It means having backups, having fall guys, having alternate routes and alternate cooks. It means taking the irrational threats seriously, even when it feels beneath you. Gus can't do that. His trauma with the cartel locks him into a single story. Be perfect. Stay patient. Get revenge. So he overinvests in the superlab, micromanages Nacho in Better Call Saul, and treats Walt as a tool he can manage instead of a man whose ego is screaming red flag from day one. The system works as long as everyone behaves the way Gus thinks a rational, self-interested person should behave. The second Walt chooses pride over survival, the whole thing cracks. And this isn't just a TV villain problem. Corporations do this when they ignore some toy startup that looks too small to matter. Institutions do it when they laugh off fringe movements until those movements suddenly have real power. Leaders do it when they assume the quiet guy in the corner will never challenge them. It's the same blind spot Gus has with Walt and Jesse. Pattern interrupt for you. Forget Breaking Bad for a second. Where in your own life are you a little too confident in a system just because it feels organized? A job that feels secure because the org chart looks neat? A relationship that would never blow up because you both seem rational? Hear me out. Gus's story is a warning about any setup that only works as long as no one hits the button out of spite. Because someone always does. And when they do, the question isn't who saw it coming. It's whose system was built to survive it. And that brings us to one of the sneakiest things Breaking Bad does. It tells you that everybody is Gus, not in the chicken restaurant drug lord way, in the I'm too smart to miss something that obvious way. Think about it. Hank spends 2 full seasons hunting Heisenberg while literally grilling with him on weekends. The guy watches Walt stare a little too hard at WW in Gale's notebook, listens to him drunkenly rant that Gale can't be Heisenberg, hears about a second cell phone, sees the suspicious duffel bag, and still, the great D agent cannot see the chemistry teacher right in front of him. His self-image as the badass cop and Walt as the pathetic brother-in-law is a filter he can't turn off. Skyler does the same thing from the other side. The gambling story, the late nights, the mountains of cash that are very obviously not coming from a car wash. At the time, almost every domestic red flag is screaming that Walt is involved in something criminal. But she clings to overworked, stressed husband with cancer because that story hurts less than the obvious one. Gus's blindness is just the high IQ, premium edition of that same problem. He truly believes he understands people, that he can read them, sort them, and file them under useful or expendable. And as long as everyone is acting for clean, rational, transactional reasons, he kind of can. But here's the thing. People in this universe almost never stay purely transactional. Jesse cooks because he wants respect. Walt cooks because he wants glory. Hector lives out of pure spite. Once emotions get involved, Gus's mental model starts quietly breaking. Look at his first big misread. Walt. Gus sees a talented chemist who can be managed, not a narcissist who will burn the world before he takes an order. Then, Jesse. Gus thinks he can fix Jesse with structure, with the lab, with a new partner. He keeps missing the obvious emotional clues, the guilt, the trauma, the way Walt can still yank Jesse's loyalty with a single well-placed sentence. But still, another missed opportunity. And Hector? Gus writes him off as a broken old man in a chair. To be fair, on paper, that looks safe. But the show has already told you who Hector is. The guy who will kill his own men just to make a point. Gus's belief that he's the rational kingpin, above petty emotion, blinds him to the one person who hates him enough to die just to take him with him. Hear me out. This is the show's real pattern. Hank the great detective, Walt the family man, Gus the flawless strategist. All 3 are smart, all 3 are competent, and all 3 are absolutely trapped by the stories they tell about themselves and about other people. That's why the world of Breaking Bad feels so cohesive. No one is dumb, they're just selectively blind. The truth is usually right there, evident, but it doesn't fit who they think they are, so they literally cannot see it until it's too late. And that's the trap Gus was always walking into. He wasn't just doomed because of who he was doomed because of the kind of story he was in. A story where no one gets to see themselves clearly until the moment it kills them. So the only real question left is how a man that careful ends up walking straight into his own explosion. So let's answer that. How does a man that careful end up walking straight into his own explosion? Think about it. The show has been giving you the answer since Max's blood hit that pool. From that moment in Hermanos, Gus's life stops being about building the best business and starts being about building the safest revenge. The chicken restaurants, the polite smile, the super lab carved into the earth like a bunker, all of it is one giant overcorrection. He's optimizing for control, for predictability, for a world where what happened to Max can never blindside him again. But here's the thing about a world that unpredictable, it doesn't care how many cameras you install. Track the pattern. With Max, Gus learns that emotion gets you killed, so he decides the solution is to strip emotion out of the equation. At the time, that feels logical. You keep your head down, you act respectable, you wait years to slowly poison the cartel. On paper, that's brilliant, but it locks him into a single mode, revenge over adaptation. He's not asking, "What's changing?" He's asking, "How do I finish the plan I already wrote?" Better Call Saul makes this even more obvious. The superlab construction, his obsession with controlling Nacho, his smug dismissal of Lalo's chaos, it all screams the same thing. Gus believes that if he builds a perfect system, human mess has to obey it. To be fair, for a long time, it works. He outplays the cartel. He outplays Lalo. He turns Albuquerque into a machine that runs on his schedule. But still, another missed opportunity. He never updates his operating system. Look at the blind spots the show keeps circling. He misreads Walt's ego, assuming he's just a talented cook who wants to be managed, not a guy whose whole identity is tied to being the smartest man in the room. He misreads Jesse's conscience, treating him like a replaceable cog instead of someone who will burn the whole thing down over a kid. He misreads Hector's pride, seeing a broken old man instead of the one person who hates him enough to die just to spite him. All those are clues. It's evident by the time we get to that nursing home that Gus isn't losing because of one bad call. He's losing because his whole worldview has a blind spot baked in, contempt for irrationality instead of curiosity about it. He never asks, "What lines would these people cross that I can't even see?" So when he walks out of that room, straightening his tie with half a face, that shot isn't just about how hard he is to kill. It's a visual reminder of how long it took for the past Max, the cartel, Hector to catch up, and how his own choices guided every step. The explosion isn't random. It's the only way a man who worships control can die, at the hands of the chaos he refused to understand. And the wild part? The show has been quietly telling you that from the first time Gus refuses to meet Walt because Jesse is high. Want to see how early his fate is sealed? So if Gus was doomed from that first refusal to meet Walt because Jesse was high, how do you actually see that doom building in real time, on a rewatch? You don't just hit play. You go in with a question loaded. Is this moment about control or about fear? Seriously, try it. Every time Gus walks into a scene, pause for half a second in your head and ask, is he tightening his grip because the situation truly demands it, or because he's scared of losing the script? Think about it when he stares Jesse down in the lab, or when he calmly tells Walt he'll take care of Hank. It looks like confidence, but here's the thing. Once you start tagging those moments as fear, a lot of his genius reads like a guy constantly flinching. Next layer, assumptions. On your rewatch, pick a few key matchups and literally pause. Gus with Hector in the nursing home. Gus with Jesse after Gail's murder. Gus with Walt in that hospital hallway. Ask yourself, what does Gus think this person will never do? With Hector, he assumes total helplessness. With Jesse, he assumes loyalty can be engineered with money and structure. With Walt, he assumes rational self-interest will beat pride. At the time, all of that feels logical. But still, another missed opportunity, every single time, to update his model. You can even turn it into a mini-game. Every time Gus personally steps in instead of delegating, mentally drop a red flag on the timeline. He goes to the cartel meeting. He visits Hector himself. He micromanages Jesse's training, Nacho's leash, the superlab construction in Better Call Saul. To be fair, it looks like a boss being hands, but if his system was as perfect as everyone believes, why does the king keep leaving the throne? Those are the moments where the machine is under the most unseen strain, and the show is quietly telling you that only Gus's presence is keeping it from snapping. If you want to go full nerd with it, set up a mini-viewing project. Watch only the Gus-centric episodes across Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, in order. And map 3 things: where his options narrow, where his enemies learn, and where he refuses to update. Early on, he learns from the cartel. Then he stops. Walt learns Gus's routines. Jesse learns how to be needed. Hector learns Gus's blind spot is his own arrogance. Hear me out. By the time we reach that nursing home, everyone but Gus has changed their strategy. And once you train your brain to spot those patterns with Gus, something really fun happens. You start seeing the same hairline cracks in every invincible TV villain you watch next. The next time a show tells you, this guy is always 10 steps ahead, you'll know exactly what question to ask. And the next section, we're going to use Gus to build that villain spotting toolkit. You'll know exactly what question to ask. And the next section, we're going to use Gus to build that villain spotting toolkit. So if Gus was always going to lose, who's actually safe in this universe? Think about it. Once you see how his greatest strength curdles into a fatal flaw, It's kind of evident the show is running the same experiment on everybody. Walter's the obvious next stop, the guy who thinks he's nothing like Gus, while slowly becoming a funhouse mirror version of him. Gus weaponizes control to erase chaos. Walt weaponizes chaos to feel in control. Different styles, same built-in doom. His pride, his need to be the smartest man in the room, starts as a survival mechanism. By the time he's orchestrating the prison shank montage, that same I can manage anything instinct is the thing that makes him sloppy and, honestly, kind of suspicious to everyone around him. Then you've got Jesse. Jesse's strength is that he actually has a conscience. He feels guilt. He cares. To be fair, in this world that's like walking into a cartel meeting wearing a giant exploit me sign, every time he tries to do the right thing, that guilt cycle just drags him back into worse situations. Jane, the kid on the bike, Brock, Andrea. His empathy is what makes him, but it's also the engine of his self-destruction. And Saul? Saul is Gus in clown makeup. Hear me out. His superpower is slipping out of any trap with a story, a loophole, a technicality. That flexibility keeps him alive for years. But here's the thing. By the time we hit Gene Takovic, that same instinct to keep wriggling, to never sit with what he's done, is exactly what ruins his last shot at safety. The moment he decides to keep scamming in Omaha, that's his version of Gus walking into Casa Tranquila. So now that we've walked through Gus's path to doom, I want to know your read. At what exact moment do you think his defeat became locked in? Was it Max's death? When revenge quietly becomes his real business model? Was it the first meeting with Walt, when he ignores all the red flags about Walt's ego because the product is just that good? Or was it the decision to keep Hector alive, convinced he was just a broken old man and not a live grenade? If you want to keep pulling on these threads, we can go a lot deeper. We can track every clue Hank misses about Heisenberg and ask when his macho view of Walt dooms him. We can break down Lalo's chaotic genius and why being unpredictable is its own kind of trap. Or we can do a full side-by-side of Walt and Gus, scene by scene, and see exactly where their need for control overlaps and where it splits. If that sounds fun, you know what to do. You can hit subscribe or just jump into the playlist of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul breakdowns. Wait, no pressure, but still, another missed opportunity if you click away now. Because in this universe, nobody is as in control as they think. Not Hank with his instincts, not Walt with his master plans, not Gus with his perfect system. The real fun of rewatching is spotting the quiet moment where each of them starts losing, long before they ever see it coming.